Actually, I would argue we have. We, courtesy of the Trump administration, got down to fewer than 20,000 troops in the area, and under Biden, we're going to go to 0 by the end of September. So we are close to there. Now, whether you think that's a brilliant idea or a horrible one is, of course, well, Saudi Arabia has long depended upon the United States' largesse, both in terms of oil purchases and military defense, in order to make itself exist. I mean, this is a country that doesn't have an economy outside of the oil markets, and this is a country that doesn't have the military capacity to patrol its own streets, much less its borders. So as the United States pulls back, the Saudis are having an oh crap moment, and they're trying to figure out what to do. So the solution seems to be to stir up as much trouble among as many rivals as possible, so they're busy putting out fires on their side of the desert borders to Saudi Arabia's north. So Yemen is kind of target practice for their air force. They've discovered they're not very good at it. But ISIS is a great example of the sort of institution that the Saudis are creating to cause problems for other countries, so those other countries can't target Saudi Arabia. So ISIS cost them almost nothing, and it stirred up the region for 7 years. Low cost, very effective. They're trying the same thing in Iran, in Chechnya. They tried the same thing with Russia in the past, not targeting the Israelis, targeting the groups that are targeting the Israelis. The Israelis and the Saudis get along splendidly, and they think about as highly of everybody else in the region as they think of each other. Now, most of the bad blood between the Americans and the Iranians, of course, dates back to the 1979 revolution and the hostage crisis. But if you look at the 50 years of history before that, we got along pretty well with the Persians because we trusted them more than we trusted the Arabs. Remember that the crown prince of Saudi Arabia right now, this is the guy who sent a hit squad to kill a journalist and then ordered them to cook it to nothing in a brick oven out in a courtyard of the embassy, and then hosted a party for 500 people to destroy the forensic evidence. These are not nice people. And with a little bit of perspective, you have the Saudis throwing terror attacks around the region for a few years, and you have Iran functionally cut out of the oil markets for a few years. The United States is probably going to look at this whole region a little bit differently. I don't mean to suggest that we're going to get back in bed with the Iranians anytime soon, but I think we're going to have a little bit more nuanced view of the region when it comes to Israel versus Saudi Arabia versus Iran. And ultimately, the country that has to kind of pick up where we left off and make sense of this, that's Turkey. And they're a country that is very capable of doing that. But just like everybody else in the world, they would rather the Americans do it. And it's not until we're completely gone that they're going to realize that it's either they do it or it's done to them. Germany is an interesting place. We all know it, of course, from history. It's one of the more warlike places. Because they're in the middle of everything and they have to be aggressive if they're going to survive. If they wait for someone else to move first, they will always be outnumbered and outgunned and surrounded. But then World War II happened, and they were forcibly reconstructed by the Allies. And so Germany today is neo-pacifist, and their general feeling is if it becomes a military competition, we've already lost. So they want to keep the competition economic and financial so that their larger size, their better geography, their more economically viable firms can dominate. And in the world of the global order, that's a good play. Because if the Americans are outlawing war in Europe and are protecting the Europeans from the Russians and from one another, then the military question isn't even on the table. And in that environment, the Germans have restructured their entire system to maximize benefit. And it's worked very, very well. And that's why Germany is the Germany that we think of, the Germany of industry and exports and manufacturing. But if you remove the Americans from that equation, it all goes to hell. And the only way that Germany continue to exist is by putting the military question back on the table and looking out for its own interests. And the last 11 times that has happened, it has ended badly. France is on the flip side. At the end of World War II, France was the least interested country in what the Americans were offering with the order because, like the United States, they've got a great geography. They've got navigable rivers, fantastic farmland, good local resources, access to the Mediterranean. This is a country that has been a world power for the last several centuries without any help, thank you very much. And then the Americans came in and said, geography doesn't matter. Everyone can play. And in that world, everything that made France special, but now remove the Americans. all of a sudden geography comes back with a vengeance. And unlike the Germans who retooled everything, the French retooled nothing. So this state-managed economic system that we see as a negative right now in a post-globalized world, that's the way to go in Europe. And they never changed anything. They also happen to have the second most powerful military in all of Europe, the second largest army after Turkey, the second largest navy after the UK. They are no joke. And unlike the United States, when it hits a certain casualty level in its conflicts, it tends to pull back. The French go in hard. They are extraordinarily unapologetic. They're almost American in their foreign policy. And so if you just fast forward through the first shipments out of the Persian Gulf. So they'll never have an energy crisis, which is something that China is just going to have to learn to live with day after day. And as the East Asian manufacturing system, Chinese system, breaks down, India, at a minimum, is going to have to make the stuff that it consumes itself. Even if it doesn't export anything, manufacturing for 1.5 billion people, that's a lot of business. India doesn't have to be globally involved to be globally relevant. But on the flip side, most capital generation comes from transporting goods from one point to the other. And in India, none of the rivers are navigable, so it all has to be dragged around by truck. So in per capita terms, India is the poorest country in financial resources in the world. But it's been like this for 1,500 years. It's not going to change just because the world ends. So if you want India to turn the corner and be this glowing, glorious thing, no, it's been 1,500 years. It's not going anywhere. But if you think that India is going to fall apart because global trade does, I am overwhelmed by the scale of the changes that we're going to be experiencing in the next decade. We've known that the floor is going to fall out of global demography for the last decade. We know that we've been living in this blessed period of the late order where everyone has access to everything, and we have all these young people and all these mature adults in the market at the same time, and we know that's going to go away. There's nothing we can do to change that. So we're going to go from the most artificial period in history to something that's a lot more normal. And the world before 1945 is a little scary, and now we have to do it without consumers and investors. So yeah, that's where the next book picks up. The provisional title is Life After the End of the World, and talks about the future of Brazil and India and Russia and the United States as countries. Life After the End of the World will do the same thing for the economic sectors, transport and energy and finance and industrial commodities and manufacturing, and show what they're going to look like on the backside of all this change.